Hello everyone, and I'm Autobot Sonic the Telltale Gamer, bringing latest on Telltale games, Transformers, and more, and I'm so glad I finally get to make this video, because we have been waiting almost, a little bit over 2 years now for more news on The Wolf Among Us 2, and today Telltale served us a full course meal of info about The Wolf Among Us 2, and I couldn't be more happier for it. And so we have so many things to talk about here with Wolf Among Us 2 after today's world reveal event of the game. We got a brand new world premiere trailer to talk about for the game. It's only 2 minutes, but we can tell so much from it in this trailer. We've got a 25-minute live stream that gives us even more info. And also, finally, we have a tentative release date for The Wolf Among Us 2. No more guessing dates. We can now say, hopefully there's no delays, that The Wolf Among Us 2 will launch sometime in 2023. Now, in my video I posted back on Tuesday, I did say I believe that The Wolf Among Us 2 will come out in either winter 2022 or spring-summer 2023. So yeah, it looks like Wolf Among Us 2 will be coming out sometime in 2023 for the Xbox One, Xbox Series X, PS4, PS5, and PC exclusively to the Epic Games Store. And wow, I still can't believe I am saying these words. In 2023, The Wolf Among Us 2 will finally be released. And fun fact, the original Wolf Among Us came out, by the time The Wolf Among Us 2 actually comes out in 2023, it will have been 10 years since the first episode of The Wolf Among Us Season 1 came out. Talk about that. We've been waiting 10 years for The Wolf Among Us Season 2 by the time it will have come out, and I think that's crazy that I was 15 years old. I was 15 years old when I started playing The Wolf Among Us 1. I'm going to be 25 when The Wolf Among Us 2 comes out. Almost a third of my life I've spent waiting for this game. I've spent almost a third of my life waiting for this game. I can't get over that. It's crazy. So there's a lot we're going to talk about in this video. This is basically going to be part 2 of my Everything You Need to Know About the Wolf Among Us 2 series, with my last part being I'm talking about the teaser trailer that came out back in the 2019 VGAs. This time we're going to be going over the world premiere trailer that Telltale just revealed in their live stream yesterday, and also what Telltale posted in their live stream and in the actual trailer. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're basically just going over the plot summary of what The Wolf Among Us 2 will be about, and a couple of new characters we can expect to see in The Wolf Among Us 2. So I know most people are probably just going to talk about the trailer, but I actually want to talk about the live stream first. And it's really interesting the way the live stream starts, because it basically the whole live stream takes place in this sort of CGI'd or motion captured studio booth, in which it's basically a recreation of an environment in The Wolf Among Us 2. So you have Jeff Keighley, of course, the host of the VGAs every year, talking to Jamie Ottilie, who is the new CEO of Telltale, as well as Nick Herman, who is one of the co-founders of Ad Hoc Studios, which is the company Telltale is working with to create the Wolf Among Us 2. But fun fact, he was also done a lot of stuff for Telltale in the past before he founded Ad Hoc. He was one of the head writers on The Wolf Among Us Season 1, Tales from the Borderlands, and even was the voice of Glenn back in The Walking Dead Season 1. Another fun fact about Nick Herman is actually that he is the fiance of Erin Yvette, the voice actress of Snow White in this game, and it's actually because of him convincing her to audition for the role of Molly in The Walking Dead Season 1 that she actually got into voice acting. So if we can go ahead and thank Mr. Nick Herman not only for creating amazing games like The Wolf Among Us, but also just giving us the amazing voice actress Erin Yvette in so many different Telltale games. We got her as Molly and Bonnie in The Walking Dead. We got her as Vicky Vale in Batman Telltale Series Season 1, Sasha in Tales from the Borderlands, and of course Snow White in The Wolf Among Us. Not even counting stuff she's done outside of Telltale. She was recently the voice of Alex in Oxenfree. She was Wormhole in After Party. She also actually replaced Leon Mary Dots as the voice of Slipstream in Transformers Battlegrounds that came out a few years ago, which I was really surprised by. And yeah, it's just crazy to think just how far back this goes. But anyway, the point is, in this little environment that Jeff Keighley is having this interview with Jamie Ottilie and Nick Herman, and later on actually Adam Harrington and Erin Yvette, the voices of Bigby and Snow, we learned from Jamie Ottilie that essentially what is happening here is that while the three of them are sitting in what is in the real world is like a green screen room, the the video cameras are actually recreating, using the Unreal Engine, one of the environments that are going to be very crucial to the plot of The Wolf Among Us 2, and Jamie Ollie says that this place is called Godmother's, and it will be the main bar setting for The Wolf Among Us 2. Now, if you remember back from Season 1 of The Wolf Among Us, the main bar that played a pivotal role in that game was a Trip Trap bar run by Holly the Troll, and then you also had people like Grendel, the Woodsman, and even Tweedledee and Tweedledum working there as well. And I actually thought this was a Trip Trap at first until I went back and rewatched a stream where Jamie Ollie straight up says that it's called Godmother's. And there's a few little Easter eggs here, both old and new, related to the Wolf Among Us that we can find here in different parts. The key one here is under this jukebox, you can actually see like a cute little thing that says, "Please don't do coke in the bathroom," which of course just honestly just makes you feel like you're really back in the 80s. Just in like a dive bar like this. On top of that, there's also later on, it's most notable in this one shot here of like whenever it pans over to Nick Herman talking, there's this picture behind him of what appears to be this woman with a bear in a suit. Now, considering that the bar is called Godmother's, is the redheaded woman with glasses on the right the titular godmother? Like, is this the fairy godmother from Cinderella and other fairy tales that she decided to create this bar, and this bear dude is one of her patrons? Maybe one of like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears? Could be that. Could be the Papa Bear from Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and the redheaded lady in the picture is the fairy godmother. I wouldn't put it past Telltale to do that, to hide a little Easter egg in like that, but it's just something that I thought needed to be pointed out just in case. Anyway, enough talking about Godmothers now, because that's pretty much all the big stuff we can talk about in regards to this setting. The main things here that we're going to talk about now, though, are essentially what is the plot of The Wolf Among Us 2. Now, if you remember back in my video I made on Tuesday talking about the plot of The Wolf Among Us 2, I said it took place 6 months after the events of Season 1. And, of course, Nick Herman and Jamie Ollie can basically restate that this game is, in fact, like, it takes place sort of, only a little bit after Season 1, being 6 months after in winter time, though we get a lot more insights to what exactly has happened in between the events of Seasons 1 and 2. So apparently, the way Season 2 starts off, Bigby is actually no longer the sheriff of Fabletown. He has been suspended from being sheriff by Snow White after some sort of incident, which I assume is what we see in the actual trailer here, but I'll get into that later. So essentially, Bigby is suspended from being sheriff of Fabletown, and he's put into an anger management class, presumably, I want to say with other Mundies, but it looks like there may be a few Fables in there as well, as I'm going to get into later on in my trailer analysis. But anyway, Nick Herman and Jamie Ollie explained that essentially, even though Bigby is no longer officially the mayor of Fabletown, or not the mayor, the sheriff of Fabletown, he and Snow White still collaborate with each other, but also butt heads together on a few occasions where this, because of course Bigby being a lot more abrasive than Snow, he has his own ways of doing things as opposed to Snow. And apparently there's some sort of big conspiracy going on that Bigby has been looking into that caused him to get suspended in the first place. So it seems as though he'll be investigating this claim, even though he's not officially the sheriff of Fabletown right now. He's still gonna go out of his way to do it. And this is where we get introduced to our third main character for The Wolf Among Us 2. So, of course, we obviously have Bigby and Snow White, but during this, Nick Herman and Jamie Ollie revealed that there is going to be a third main character in The Wolf Among Us 2, and it's something that I really wish happened back in Wolf Among Us 1, and that is we are going to get a Mundy main character. Now, of course, for any of those who don't remember the Wolf Among Us 1 or just aren't aware of the world of Fables, Mundies are essentially what Fables call normal humans in the world of The Wolf Among Us, essentially. So if you're just like a regular human who wasn't like a fairy tale character, like let's say Snow White or even Bluebeard from Season 1, they're referred to as a Mundy. Kind of like how in the Harry Potter world, people who are witches and wizards are called Muggles. So you can just say that Mundies are essentially the Muggles of the Wolf Among Us world. So during this live stream, Jamie Ollie and Nick Herman reveal that one of the three main characters of Wolf Among Us 2 is a brand new character named Detective Fay Leong, and she is a NYPD human detective who apparently uncovers the same conspiracy plot or crime case that Bigby is investigating, and apparently she looks into this and tries to help Bigby out with solving this case. And it's really interesting because now not only is Bigby gonna have Fay Leong as a rival / ally to deal with in The Wolf Among Us 2, but also because she's a Mundy, that also means that you gotta play this double-sided game of basically trying to make sure that the whole existence of Fables doesn't get leaked out to the outside world, because that's the whole point of Fabletown, is that they don't want any of the humans to know that they're all just fairy tale characters living in New York City. And this is something I really wish happened in The Wolf Among Us 1, and we almost actually did get this to happen. In case you don't remember, back in The Wolf Among Us Season 1, in Episode 2 of Season 1, it starts with Bigby actually being taken into NYPD custody and being interrogated by a human detective named Kelsey Brannigan. Now, Kelsey Brannigan was played by Cissy Jones, who you may recognize as the voice of Katja, Jolene and Bree in The Walking Dead Season 1, Shell in The Walking Dead 400 Days, or even Norma in The Walking Dead Michonne, on top of many other minor roles throughout other different Telltale games. But the way Detective Brannigan's role was essentially, she essentially interrogates Bigby as to basically what she believes is the murder of Snow White. But of course, though, they don't know that Bigby is actually Big Bad Wolf. They don't know Snow White is the Snow White. So she's just trying to get answers from Bigby, and basically Bigby just has to also keep basically the secret of Fabletown to himself. But while he's being interrogated by Detective Brannigan, suddenly she and all the other officers inside the police station pass out because Ichabod Crane comes in using a mind wipe spell to basically put everyone to sleep and wipe everyone's memories of the case. So therefore, Bigby and Crane just escape, and that's the last we see of Detective Brannigan in The Wolf Among Us Season 1. But what if I told you that wasn't the original plan for Detective Brannigan? There are several leaked videos that have surfaced throughout the years that have shown that the scene with Detective Brannigan was going to be a lot longer, and she was actually going to play a much larger role in the story of The Wolf Among Us Season 1. If you played The Wolf Among Us Season 1 back when it first came out in 2013, this is most apparent and by the original thumbnail for The Wolf Among Us Episode 3, A Crooked Mile. In the current version of The Wolf Among Us Season 1, if you go to Episode 3, the thumbnail is of Bigby chasing down Ichabod Crane's car in the middle of a street, because as you know, that's when everyone thinks Crane is the one who killed Holly's sister Lily, who was using a glamour to pretend to be Snow White just so Crane could have sex with her. But, of course, if you played The Wolf Among Us 1 back when it first came out, all the way back in October of 2013, before Episode 2 came out, the thumbnail for Episode 3 was actually way different. Instead, we had Bigby entering the woodlands, but outside was Detective Brannigan in a much more relaxed outfit, armed with a gun, standing outside, looking like she was getting ready to shoot Bigby. So it seemed as though Detective Brannigan was going to play a much larger role in The Wolf Among Us 1, essentially being a Mundy cop who discovers the existence of Fables and is trying to prove to the rest of the world that Fables do actually exist. So maybe that's what Telltale is trying to do now with Detective Fay Leong here, and trying to make her the new version of Detective Brannigan. But regardless, though, I'm so happy that Telltale is doing this for The Wolf Among Us 2, because this is something I really, really wanted to see in Wolf Among Us 1, and I was so upset they didn't. But now they're actually going to incorporate Mundies more into The Wolf Among Us 2. I couldn't be happier, and I can't, honestly, out of all the new characters aside from one that shows up in the trailer, I'm really, really excited to see what Detective Fay Leong brings to the table. Speaking of Fay Leong, she also appears in what I can only assume is going to be the main cover for The Wolf Among Us 2 here, and I honestly love this cover, if we can call this the cover of The Wolf Among Us 2. It's Bigby, Snow White, and Fay Leong all standing over the skyline of New York City, with, of course, Bigby taking up the main part of the cover. He's seen in his winter trench coat smoking a cigarette, but half of his face is like cast in like a purple shadow, with his hair like a lot more like all wild and his eyes glowing red, similar to how he does whenever he goes into like his werewolf form. We also see our first proper in-engine look at Snow White here, and honestly, I love her having her hair out more. I don't know like what it is with her hair, but her hair just looks so much better here than it did in Wolf Among Us 1. It feels more alive. And then, of course, we also got our first in-engine look at Detective Fay Leong here as well. We have her off to the side, to the right of Snow White here, holding like a walkie-talkie, it appears like, in her right hand, and a pistol in the other. And again, I think this really sets up that Fay Leong is going to play a very major role in The Wolf Among Us 2. And considering how she's juxtaposed here with Snow as sort of like an opposing force, I think it's going to be interesting to see if Fay Leong will not only be an enemy or potential enemy to Bigby, considering the fact that she's going to be a human cop that Bigby has to make sure that she doesn't figure out like the existence of Fables and all that, But what if, in a way, Fay Leong ends up working with Bigby? Maybe there'll be some points where Big decides does he want to work with Snow White on something or work with Fay Leong on another thing. And honestly, that's something I'm really excited to see because, in a way, Fay Leong seems to remind me a lot of Agent Avesta from Batman and the Enemy Within. Now, if you don't remember playing Batman and the Enemy Within, Amon Avesta was an agent that appeared in that game as a member of Amanda Waller's agency called, well, the Agency. And so she was Waller's top agent who often butt heads with Batman and Bruce Wayne throughout the course of the game. Eventually, though, the game does end sort of with Amon Avesta becoming an ally for Batman and Bruce, depending on which choices you make for her. And it's really like you can go behind, usually you're supposed to be working with Waller, but you can also go behind Waller's back to work with Avesta as well throughout the entirety of Batman the Enemy Within. And this really makes me feel like that's what this is, that essentially Bigby's gonna be conflicted as to whether there'll be several points in the game where he has to decide whether he wants to side with Snow White or side with Fay Leong, and I'm really interested to see that. And again, just this artwork is absolutely beautiful, and I'm so happy with it, honestly. Along with that, though, we also get more stuff from the live stream. This is just gonna round out everything every minor thing that's in the live stream. We do know that we got official confirmation from Nick Herman and Jamie Ottilie themselves that The Wolf Among Us 2 will be 5 episodes long. So for anyone who's worried that it was going to be shorter than that for whatever reason, don't worry. The Wolf Among Us 2 will be 5 episodes long, and they also said they are working on all of them at once. So before episode 1 comes out, and they did confirm that The Wolf Among Us 2 will be released episodically still, even before episode 1 comes out, episodes 2 through 5 will also be done. Now the question is, though, how long we'll have to wait between episodes. Now Nick Herman talks about this a bit in the live stream, saying that you could be waiting anywhere from a week to maybe 2 to 2.5 weeks per episode. Honestly, I would be really happy if they decide to make every episode come out every 2 weeks. So 1 week we get episode 1, then 2 weeks after that we get episode 2, and so on. That way, The Wolf Among Us 2 gets about basically 2.5 months to just be constantly talked about by fans and such for people, kind of drags out the game a lot longer, and therefore makes the engagement of the game go up a lot more too. Because if you released all 5 episodes at once, then people can just finish it in one day and be like, oh, well, nothing else to do now. Just gotta wait 10 more years for The Wolf Among Us 3. But no, now that if they decide to wait 2 weeks between episodes, that means you're gonna have the game going on for at least 2.5 months. That's almost a quarter of a year of The Wolf Among Us 2, if that's the case, and I really hope so. Because, honestly, this is a game I do not want to rush. The Wolf Among Us 2 is something that's really cool, and I can't wait to see it. But before we continue any further with this everything news about video, I just want to stress also again, just when you're talking about The Wolf Among Us 2 online, please be mindful of other Telltale employees that were working on the original version of Wolf Among Us 2 back in 2017, before Telltale shut down. For those of you who don't know, when Telltale shut down, apparently the version of The Wolf Among Us 2 that is currently being made is actually nothing like the version of The Wolf Among Us 2 that was going to be created by the original Telltale. There have been a few leaks here and there as to what the original version of Wolf Among Us 2 was going to entail. That originally it was going to be 3 episodes long instead of 5, that's the biggest rumor, and that there was some mocap involved, that it was going to be a hugely different Wolf Among Us experience. And a lot of Telltale employees who were affected by the layoffs of when Telltale shut down in 2018, they kind of have bad blood with The Wolf Among Us 2 and this new Telltale, but for good reason. I do understand that in their eyes they do believe that that Telltale did screw them over. But I just want to I want to play devil's advocate here and say that while the old Telltale employees do have every right to be furious and upset with Telltale for how they treated them, you also have to take in mind, though, that this new Telltale is not the same Telltale that fired all those Telltale employees 5 years ago, back in 2018. This new Telltale, it's only Telltale in name. All the executive management, Jamie Ottilie, Ryan Waddle, those people had nothing to do with the original Telltale. They were just a company working on their own, LCG Entertainment. They saw the name Telltale and they thought, hey, look, the Telltale name sells, so let's go ahead and just buy the name Telltale Games. We'll rebrand as Telltale, and then we'll just hire a bunch of old Telltale employees to get good faith with the fans, and therefore get trust with them that we're gonna do the right thing with The Wolf Among Us 2. And there are still a few people who were working on the original version of Wolf Among Us 2 working on this newer version, but again, there are still people out there that were working on the original Wolf Among Us 2, but just aren't able to now, and hold some sort of like disdain towards the new Telltale for that, but which it's totally understandable. But also at the same time, for anyone who feels like if you're in the wrong for supporting a new Telltale, don't be, because again, this new Telltale has nothing to do with the old Telltale. I mean, I think it would have been cool if maybe LCG Entertainment just bought the rights to the Wolf Among Us and just called it that, The Wolf Among Us 2, a game by LCG Entertainment, but I get it. It's a business thing. In the world of game marketing, brands sell. So if you call The Wolf Among Us 2 a LCG game, who's going to want to buy that? If you call it a Telltale game, then it's going to do a lot better. It's the same thing with mostly like the Call of Duty series is the biggest thing I like to call about. Like, look about all the Black Ops and Modern Warfare games. You look at stuff like Call of Duty Vanguard, and look at how poorly that's sold compared to like the big name games like a Black Ops game or a Modern Warfare game. The names Modern Warfare and Black Ops sell just like the name Telltale sells. If you call, like for example, if Telltale's working on the Expanse, the Telltale series right now, right? If it was just LCG, if LCG wanted to make a Expanse game and just called it the Expanse, the LCG series, you think as many people would buy it if it was called that and not the Expanse, the Telltale series? Again, it sucks that it has to happen like this. I would think it'd be cool if LCG just didn't buy the Telltale name and just rebranded something else. But I understand that in the world of video game business, that you kind of need to have this to be successful. So if that means buying the Telltale name and just becoming Telltale all in just nothing but name, then you just go ahead and do it. But I think that the new Telltale is going about it the right ethical way, so to speak. But I understand, again, for any of the old Telltale employees who are feeling upset or betrayed because of this, I understand where you're coming from. And for any of my subscribers watching, please don't send those Telltale employees any hate saying, oh, you're wrong for doing this, you should be happy that The Wolf Among Us 2 is being made, oh, your version probably sucked anyway. No, don't do that, because they have every right to be upset. But just because they are, you shouldn't feel bad for liking this version of Wolf Among Us 2. But enough of that. That was just a little rant I wanted to give, because I feel like I don't see anyone talking about this in their Wolf Among Us 2 videos, and I thought I needed to address this right now. But enough of that, we're finally going to go ahead and jump into my analysis of the Wolf Among Us 2 world premiere trailer. But in case anyone who hasn't seen it yet, I'm going to go ahead and play it one more time for y'all, just in case you haven't seen it yet.
You're listed here as a private investigator. What does that sort of work entail?
Depends on the night. Most nights, it's watching, waiting for a slip-up. I don't know, someone gets greedy, someone gets brave.
And that's what you were doing the night of the incident?
Yeah. Took me weeks to track them down. They hadn't cast so much as a shadow. Till that night.
You've been hesitant to share with us. I assume it has something to do with confidentiality associated with the job.
Something like that.
Your boss, Miss White, said things didn't go as planned. She mentioned that there was some violence? In the moments when you find yourself losing control. How does the anger manifest itself?
So So the trailer starts off with a unknown woman talking to Bigby, basically saying that, asking like who he is, and basically we learn from that apparently we later find out this is basically sort of Bigby's guidance counselor in the anger management group that he goes to every now, because since Snow White suspended him as sheriff of Fabletown, this woman is talking to Bigby saying that he is some sort of private investigator, which is a cool way of like just covering, because as far as we know, she's a Mundy, so of course can't just go around saying he's the sheriff of Fabletown. So instead of just saying that Bigby's a private investigator, it's a nice little like just cover there. So she asks Bigby like what being a private investigator entails, and as Bigby talks to her, we see basically Bigby tailing a suspect here. We see him telling him to a place called the Good Sleep Motel, and immediately as we pan down and see the look of the Good Sleep Motel, it reminds me a lot actually of the Travelier Motel from The Walking Dead Season 1, the same motel that Lee, Glenn, and Carly headed to go ahead and try and rescue Irene back in Season 1, Episode 1 of The Walking Dead, and of course the one that Lee's whole group stayed at in Episodes 2 and 3 of The Walking Dead Season 1. I know all motels kind of look the same, but just the fact that the way the sign looks and the actual like lighting of everything, the geography of the map as well, I just can't help but shake the feeling that this is some sort of nice homage to The Walking Dead Season 1, that this is what Telltale put Telltale on the map, and now this is the new Telltale trying to put their self on the map as well, with this kind of homage back to The Walking Dead Season 1, which kind of got Telltale to hit the ground running, so to speak. So as we pan down to see the Good Sleep Motel, we see this large, bulky figure covered in like a raincoat quickly rushing towards the stairs of the motel. And when I first saw this trailer, I thought to myself, because okay, super broad shoulders, this guy is a tank, he looks like. Is this Tweedledee? Is this Tweedledee from The Wolf Among Us 1? Because again, if you remember from Wolf Among Us 1, Tweedledee was basically an enforcer for the Crooked Man alongside his brother Tweedledum, and the two of them constantly got into like conflict with Bigby throughout the course of the game. Eventually though, this came to a climax at the end of episode 3 of Wolf Among Us Season 1, where Bigby had the option to potentially kill Tweedledum, and of course then this would make Tweedledee even more antagonistic towards Bigby throughout the remainder of the season. But episode 5 ended with Tweedledee surviving, so I thought at first this was going to be Tweedledee maybe like getting revenge on Bigby for Tweedledum, but no, unfortunately this is not Tweedledee. But the character that is this under this cloak is a lot cooler in my opinion. So as we see this figure currently run through the rain into the motel, we see again a great look of how Telltale is handling lighting now, and this is just part of why I loved the art style of The Wolf Among Us 2 so much. The way the lights shine, cast these perfect yellow silhouettes as the figure passes by the open windows too. Everything is just so perfect, and as the figure just manages to barely make it through the door frame, which is how big he is, we see Bigby light his cigarette right up, we see the light of his lighter light his face a bit, and again, it's just crazy to think how far Telltale has come in just 10 years since they worked on The Wolf Among Us 1, and how well they improved with their effects as you can see the actual flame flicker more as Bigby lights a cigarette instead of it just being just a static flame effect like it was in Season 1, and it's just so good. And so we see Bigby like pull away the smoke, and we get presumably here like a car passes by, and the headlights reflect over Bigby, finally illuminating him, and we get to see our first proper in-engine look of Bigby in The Wolf Among Us 2, and I gotta say, he looks incredible. He looks HD, but not to the degree where the art style is unrecognizable from how he looked in Wolf Among Us Season 1. Now, I mean, you can obviously tell that Bigby's model looks quite a bit different from how it does in Season 1, but not like drastically different where he's a totally different person. This is honestly a great look for Bigby, and I especially love how his blue trench coat looks in this. Honestly, I'm really liking this design for Bigby even more than I did in his Season 1 appearance. He looks great. And another thing though here, I just want to point out as well, as the headlights pass by over Bigby, illuminating him, when they pass him and it covers him back in darkness again, you can see how the lighting of this works better, especially with the hot tub behind Bigby. You see the steam rolling off the hot tub, and how the lights inside not the hot tub or the pool just like illuminates it with this really pretty light green. I love the neon effect of The Wolf Among Us 2 here in this trailer. It always just looks so pretty as we see Bigby just narrate more to this woman at the anger management place about basically what his job is as presumably a sheriff of Fabletown. After that, we move into the scene where Bigby is actually breaking into the Good Sleep Motel, specifically the one that the big figure went into. And again, first I'm just going to gush a bit about how beautiful this game looks, because first you see here when Bigby actually goes to break into the door. I love how the yellow lights from the motel lights above bleed into the dim hallway here, illuminated by the bright yellow. But the big thing here that I'm really excited by is as Bigby opens the door and you see the little door lock catch the door, pay attention to when Bigby actually grabs the chain of the door lock and rips it off the wall. You can see like very, very faintly when Bigby rips the door lock off the wall really quietly. There's a little like spark, or I guess splintering wood effect, if you can call it that, when he rips the door lock off the wall. That honestly just gives me so much hope for this game, especially with the fact that think about if this was Wolf Among Us 1. If this scene was in Wolf Among Us 1 10 years ago, when Bigby did that, there would be no visual effects there. You just hear like a sound effect of the lock breaking off, and then that'd be it. But now we've got a nice little, even though it's very subtle, but there is still a very small detail of either sparks flying or like the wood splintering from Bigby ripping off the door lock from the wall that I absolutely love. And these effects only get even better from here as we see Bigby, when Bigby opens the door and the full yellow light just bleeds into the hallway, casting Bigby as this really cool silhouette in the hallway. Honestly, I kind of want this shot right here as like a wallpaper for my computer, honestly, because it looks so good. And even better is when Bigby opens the door, you can actually see like a little bit of smoke coming out of his mouth. And I'm not sure if this is either from a cigarette or maybe just his breath, like sort of becoming like visually visible in the cold weather. It could be one of the two, either his breath or just the smoke from a cigarette. But it's these small things like that, these very, very small details that just give me so much hope for Telltale in this for the new Telltale, I should say, considering just the work work and effort that is being put into this game is so much better than what we saw back in the original Wolf Among Us 10 years ago. It's so crazy to do that. But alright, I'm done gushing about that though. As Bigby is breaking into the hotel, we hear him still narrating to whoever he's talking to at the anger management place, saying that the person he'd been tracking he had been tracking for weeks until they finally slipped up and led him back to the Good Sleep Motel. And so the woman asks him if this is where the incident happened. Now, of course, as we know from the plot summary of The Wolf Among Us 2, Bigby is suspended from being Sheriff of Fabletown after a certain incident. So it seems to me like I bet this is going to be how episode 1 starts off, with Bigby still as sheriff, trailing this person. Eventually, things get out of hand. It gets to the point where Snow White has to step in and decide to suspend Bigby just so that she doesn't seem to be like playing favorites in front of the rest of Fabletown community. As the trailer goes on, we see Bigby walking down the hallway slowly towards where we can hear like a TV playing in another room, blocked off by these sort of like hanging bead doors. I don't know the actual term for these doors, so I'm just gonna call them the hanging bead doors. But anyway, Bigby walks through the hallway, again just showing off how beautiful The Wolf Among Us 2 looks now it's on Unreal. And as Bigby just hangs in front of the beaded door with his face, with his body partially covered by all the shadows and dim light in the dark hallway, we get to see like a point of view from Bigby's point of view, where we see this red-headed girl just sitting on a couch watching TV. But then of course she looks up at Bigby almost as if she knows that he's there. But behind her, we also see the hooded figure that we saw enter the motel at the start of this trailer, seeming to look outside the window. And here's where the big reveal comes in. So Bigby considers thinking that the woman already sees her anyway, decides to just go ahead and slowly walks through the beaded door, revealing himself to everyone. And then the hooded figure turns around, and surprise, surprise, it is not Tweedledee as I previously thought, but it is actually the Tin Man from the Wizard of Oz fame. And honestly, I gotta say, I absolutely love the Tin Man's design here, and I'm really happy that it's the Tin Man, because minor spoilers for the Fables comics here, the Tin Man is actually a minor character in the Fables comics, where he, Dorothy, and the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion all had escaped from the Fable lands like several years ago, actually coming into New York City in the Mundy world in the mid-1940s. And honestly, I absolutely love how they do the Tin Man here, especially with how his white eyes are glowing under his under his cloak, and you can even hear like his metal joints creaking and groaning as he turns around to look at Bigby. It honestly looks great. And then, but because of this, the fact that we know that this is the Tin Man, and then later on we see another famous Wizard of Oz character here, as we see Bigby go, he walks to the door, pulling out a pair of handcuffs, presuming it looks like he's going to arrest the Tin Man. He's looking at him for a moment as we cut to a close-up shot of his eyes, before he turns his attention to something else, as we hear what sounds like someone taking a really fat rip from a bong, and turns out it's the Scarecrow from the Wizard of Oz now, just hitting up on. And again, I'm just gonna gush about the visual effects here, because you can see when the Scarecrow is just smoking this bond, the smoke particles that are seen blowing out of the bond, and then later as he breathes out in shock, seeing Bigby up in front of him, the smoke that comes out of his mouth, it just looks so fluid and seems like nothing unlike we've seen in other Telltale games. That to see how far Telltale has come in 10 years, and now the fact that they're working on Unreal Engine instead of the Telltale tool, it's crazy to see how far Telltale has come. So now we know that the Wizard of Oz characters are going to be playing a big role in The Wolf Among Us 2. We have the Scarecrow and the Tin Man, but that begs the question as to who the girl is in this trailer. Now, although it's not officially confirmed by Nick Herman or Jamie Otterly or any stated anywhere in the trailer, I am 99.9% sure that the woman in this trailer is none other than, of course, Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. Now, I've seen a lot of people saying that the trailer, this is Rose Red, the sister of Snow White, who is a major character in the Fables comics, but it makes no sense for it to be Rose Red, because first off, her hair is slightly different from how it looks in how this woman's looks in The Wolf Among Us 2, and second, Snow White doesn't see Rose for years. The first time she actually sees her, like, in a long time, is at the start of the Fables comics. That's what kind of kickstarts the whole comic, is Rose Red reuniting with Snow White after so long, presumably needing help with something. And the way that is, I don't see Telltale just retconning the Fables comic just to make this story work. Now, with these Wizard of Oz characters, on the other hand, the Tin Man actually does make a minor appearance in the Fables comics, so it makes sense for him to appear in The Wolf Among Us 2 as well. But also, it makes more sense that this woman in the trailer is none other than Dorothy. And because, fun fact, Dorothy is actually a major character in the Fables comics as well. So I'm going to give some minor spoilers for the Fables comics, so if you just want to go and skip ahead, I'll maybe put like a time code in the description or something like that, basically stating where I'll stop talking about Dorothy. But here's the story of Dorothy in the Fables universe. So in the Fables universe, Dorothy is actually an assassin for hire, of all things. And this starts from her story back in the Wizard of Oz time, where apparently she wasn't like tasked to go just make her way through Oz and get the ruby slippers away from the Wicked Witch of the West like she does in the movies and the original fairy tale. And here, the Good Witch of the East actually told Dorothy to straight up go ahead and kill the Wicked Witch of the West, which of course she did, like she did in the original Wizard of Oz movie and story, by dousing her with a bucket of water, melting her. Now, something that I'm just really crazy, I'm just saying out loud, it's crazy to think that the Wizard of Oz movie is going to be 100 years old in less than 10 years. Honestly, I think that's crazy, that the first ever colored movie is going to be 100 years old in 9 years. But slight tangent, just going to leave that there. But yeah, Dorothy is not someone you want to mess with in the Fables comics. She is a badass in her own right. Pretty much, I feel like she's going to be the Bloody Mary of this season, that she's going to be like the femme fatale of the Wolf Among Us 2 that is going to constantly butt heads with Bigby throughout the entirety of this game. And though we don't hear Dorothy speak, or she doesn't really even do much in this trailer, I think that's just because they want to save what Dorothy is going to do later on. And again, I just can't wait to see what she and the Tin Man and even the Scarecrow all bring to the Wolf Among Us 2. Hopefully we'll see the Cowardly Lion appear at some point as well, especially because the Cowardly Lion is actually a minor character in the Fables comics as well, but he doesn't appear all in this trailer. So I thought at first maybe like they're gonna show him at like the end that he's gonna be this really big badass lion, but no, he doesn't show up at all. So maybe we'll see him again either later down the line, or maybe just Telltale doesn't have a plan for him and they're just gonna focus on Dorothy, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow instead. After we see the shot of the Scarecrow just like looking total shock at Bigby, blowing out all the smoke out of his mouth, we smash cut to the anger management place where Bigby is currently recounting the events of this incident where he met Dorothy, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow to hit this like anger management counselor. And here Bigby does not have his winter trench coat on, back to his season 1 look. And I gotta say, this more proper look we have of Bigby HD now in the Wolf Among Us 2 engine as opposed to how he looked 10 years ago in the Wolf Among Us 1. It's crazy to see just how much Bigby looks the same, but also how different he looks compared to the Wolf Among Us 1. He looks like everything looks so watery, I want to say, that his whole body like seems to shine more in the Wolf Among Us 2. And honestly, you can say about any of the characters here in the Wolf Among Us 2 compared to this one. But we get this nice little shot here after Bigby like takes a break from talking to her, where we get a little like wider shot of the whole area, the anger management area. We get this nice little funny board here that it's kind of like the rule set here. If we take a look at it, it says anger management, find the name the problem, find solution, congratulate progress. And honestly, I think this is just a cute little thing, just adds more like soul to this environment, as we see it appears to be like in the remnants of some sort of like church or school, maybe, given by all the Christmas decorations, like the Jesus Christ set design they've got going on this little stage here behind Bigby. But here's something interesting about this shot that I don't see a lot of people talking about, but actually I have to give this to thanks to Gamer Percy, who noted this in his reaction, and after looking at it, I'd have to say the same thing. So if you're looking at all the people here around Bigby, the woman who is in the bottom left corner that looks like Velma from Scooby-Doo, she's the one leading the whole anger management session. And then the two women that we see here, the one that with her back to the camera, the purple shirt, and the one here that's illuminated in the gray shirt, those characters, I don't think we've seen at all. I think they're just random Mundies. The interesting thing here, though, is the man to the right of Bigby here, like with the bald head, when he turns his head to the left more so that he looks at the Velma lookalike here. Honestly, from the side profile alone, this to me looks a lot like Johann the Butcher from the Wolf Among Us Season 1. Now, if you don't remember him, well, Johann the Butcher was the butcher who ran the cut above meat shop in the Wolf Among Us 1, which, as we learned in episode 4 of the Wolf Among Us 1, that he was essentially acting as a delivery man for the Crooked Man, selling like black market goods to different people in Fable Town. He even was running like a drug lab in the cut above, like creating black illegal glamours for all the Fables in Fable Town. So is this Johann the Butcher? Is this really him making a comeback after being sort of a minor character in the Wolf Among Us 1, or is this just a character who there's a random Mundi who bears a striking resemblance to Johann? I really want to say that it is Johann the Butcher, but I'm not going to say anything, like say it's one way or the other. It could easily just be someone else, or just Telltale reusing Johann's model for a random Mundi. I wouldn't put it past Telltale to do that, considering how much of a minor character he was in Season 1, but it would be so cool if this was Johann, and maybe he's got some underlying anger management issues that we just don't know about, and he's going here. Maybe he's the one who introduced Bigby to this anger management course, but that would be really funny to see. Once Bigby, after that, the Velma lookalike, I'm just gonna call her Velma. So Velma here looks at Bigby, asking more information about what happened that night. So according to her, she says that she learned from Snow White, who she calls Miss White in this trailer, that there was an incident at this little like sting job that Bigby did. So we then cut back to that incident as we see Bigby handcuff the Scarecrow, presumably for the illegal drugs he was doing, and seems to start taking him out of the motel room, while we see just Dorothy continuing to watch the TV, seemingly like unfazed by the fact that Bigby's arresting a Scarecrow. And as we see him walk through the hallway here out towards the door, we hear Velma talk over a voiceover saying that there was some sort of violent incident at here. And here's where we get the best part of this trailer, in my opinion. And we have the Tin Man just punch his arm through the wall here as Bigby is walking down, grabs Bigby by the throat, and pulls him through the wall. And here the visual effects are just so good of when a Tin Man and Bigby fight here. We see the best part here is you can see here when Bigby is actually thrown into this wall by the Tin Man. Look at the wall as Bigby is thrown into it. We get a nice little like cloud of dust like that comes off the wall as Bigby is knocked into it, like as if it's an actual like comic book effect, like you're watching an actual like cartoon where a character would be thrown into a wall and there's like a big dust impact from being thrown to a wall. It's absolutely great. And then we see this shot of the Tin Man now no longer wearing his cloak. Now he's got a big tank top on and sweatpants, grabs Bigby by the ankle and throws him into another wall. There's no impact here, but again, it's just cool to see just how the Tin Man especially looks in the Wolf Among Us 2 now, especially with how he looks in the dark light, and all the lights, the dim lights in the room are reflecting off his metal skin, illuminating him in this nice yellow and blue combo. I absolutely love it. And it gets really good here, the effects too, as when we see the Tin Man go to try and throw a punch at Bigby, which Bigby ducks under, you can see there's even like a small little like trail effect to the Tin Man's fist as he tries to punch at Bigby. That I honestly love this. That this is stuff we would never see from Telltale 10 years ago, and it gets even better here as when Bigby actually manages to land a punch on a Tin Man. There's this really beautiful yellow like pow effect as Bigby punches the Tin Man. There's this, you hear this big loud metal clang effect, obviously because Bigby's punching a dude made entirely of metal. You see the big yellow like comic book effect as Bigby punches the Tin Man in the face. It looks like as if there's actual like sparks flying off him too as the Tin Man stumbles back. This even gets thrown even better as we see it cut to a shot suddenly of Bigby for some reason grabbing the Scarecrow and slamming his face down onto a lit stove in the room. Just like with the Tin Man, when Bigby slams the Scarecrow's face onto the stove, there's this nice little like yellow like pow impact effect from the game as Bigby slams his face into the stove. But then we even gets even better as when he slams the Scarecrow's face onto the stove, we see the Scarecrow's head actually catch fire from the stove, and the fire effects are absolutely beautiful. There's this really funny moment where the Scarecrow is just screaming, running around the hotel room on fire as the fire illuminates the whole room, especially Dorothy here, who is just sitting on the couch, still doesn't even seem to care the fact that the Scarecrow's around her on fire and that Bigby and the Tin Man are fighting all around her. She's just like watching with mild interest before just going back to her TV. Honestly, I really like Dorothy's character here, and I can't wait to see what she does in the main game, just considering like how big of a character she is in the Fables comics. What exactly is her role going to be in the Wolf Among Us 2 going forward, if she's going to be the Bloody Mary of this game? Speaking of which, that really gives me hope that the Tin Man is actually going to be the Grendel of this game, if Grendel doesn't show up in Season 2. But the fight doesn't stop there, as we see now as Tin Man's battling Bigby, he's just absolutely destroying the motel room, as we see a bunch of lovely more comic book effects as the Tin Man's just flailing his arms around the room. We see this really nice shot here where Tin Man like seems to slam his fist through like a window or some sort of like girder or something. We see this like these huge like comic book lines that impact as glass is shattering and like wood is splintering, that Bigby like ducks under another punch that the Tin Man throws. There's even one point where Bigby is still dodging punches that Tin Man's throwing, and the Tin Man accidentally ends up hitting the Scarecrow, who is still running around the room on fire. There's another great effect there when Tin Man actually hits the Scarecrow. Again, another like, it's even though it's hard to see because of all the fire, but there is an effect where Tin Man's fist hits the Scarecrow's face. There's a nice little like subtle pow effect as he knocks the Scarecrow to death accidentally. But eventually as the fight goes on, the Tin Man doesn't actually manage to land a hit on Bigby, stunning him for a moment, and then he grabs him like in a tackle, starts running with him towards a wall, and literally just throws Bigby through the wall, presumably into another room in the motel. And again, the effects here are great, especially with how you see all the wood splinter as Bigby is thrown through the wall. There's the dust as well settling through, and even gets better as you see when Bigby is knocked through the wall, it cuts the power in all the rooms, shutting off the TV that Dorothy was watching. So the only thing illuminating her face now is presumably the fire that the Scarecrow is currently covered in, that I absolutely love. And then we get the ending of this trailer, which is honestly so good. We have the Tin Man just looking over the hole in the wall that he created by throwing Bigby through it, and then the Scarecrow goes to join him, now like finally patting off all the fire that was on him, presumably not seeming unaffected at all by the fact that his whole body was on fire. You know, the dude made of straw is totally unfazed by the fact that he was on fire for a good, let's say, 15-20 seconds. No burn marks at all. His whole body isn't like dust or whatever, no biggie. But as the Scarecrow and Tin Man are just looking at the hole, we start to hear some very excited growling from the outside, from the other motel room, as we hear Velma talking again as a voiceover to Bigby, saying that when violent things happen to Bigby, he tends to get angry, and asks him what exactly that anger manifests itself as. And here comes a really big part, as we see when the Scarecrow and Tin Man are actually looking at presumably Bigby in like shock. we cut to a close-up of Dorothy looking over at Bigby now too, though she seems to actually be like excited by looking at Bigby. And again, because of this, Dorothy to me is just screaming, like she's giving me big Bloody Mary vibes, that I feel like she's going to be the Bloody Mary of this season, and I'm really looking forward to see what Dorothy brings to the table to Wolf Among Us 2. And after that, we just cut to another shot of just Velma talking to Bigby before we cut back to it of showing from behind the Tin Man and the Scarecrow as they look over at Bigby, transformed now into his werewolf form, getting ready to fight the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. And I gotta say, I didn't know how much I needed a redesign for Bigby's werewolf form until this happened. Now, if you remember back at how Bigby's werewolf form looked in the Wolf Among Us 1, it pretty much just looked like Bigby, like human form, but if he was just covered in hair. If he was just covered in hair. Like, literally, here's like a look at what Bigby looked like in his werewolf form in the Wolf Among Us Season 1. Compare that now to how he looks in the Wolf Among Us 2. He looks so much better. Like, look at how yellow his eyes look. The fact that he's a lot fluffier, that he really does look like a wolf now, especially with how his head is actually designed to look like a proper wolf head instead of just what it was in the Wolf Among Us Season 1 where it was just a human head just covered in hair. I just absolutely love how Bigby's werewolf design looks here, and I wish this scene was a little bit brighter so we just got a full look at just how large Bigby is as werewolf form, that I didn't think we'd be seeing his werewolf form this early on in the Wolf Among Us 2. But this honestly gives me an idea as to what exactly happened here at the incident and as to what caused Bigby to become suspended as a sheriff of Fabletown. Because, again, minor spoilers for the Fables comics. Of course, I talked about how Dorothy, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion are all minor and major characters in the Fables comics. However, the Scarecrow never actually shows up in the Fables comics. He does appear once in a flashback explaining how he, Dorothy, and the Tin Man all escaped from the Fable lands back in like ancient times, but we never actually see the Scarecrow during the modern day story of the Wolf Among Us. So what if that's the reason why Bigby is suspended as being sheriff of Fabletown? What if Bigby actually ends up killing the Scarecrow in his like enraged form as he goes into his werewolf form here, which god, still looking at it now, I can't get over just how good werewolf Bigby looks in the Wolf Among Us 2 compared to how he looked in the Season 1. The growling of his face, the way his yellow eyes glow in the darkness, especially when you can see like how his ears pin back as he's growling like a real wolf. He looks so good. And I'm so happy that Telltale decided to go ahead and do a redesign of Bigby's werewolf form. It gets me really excited that hopefully we'll get to see Bigby's full wolf form by the end of this game as well, like we did when we saw him turn into his full wolf form to fight Bloody Mary at the end of Episode 5 of Season 1. Oh, I'm just so excited for that. But anyway, before we can see what Bigby does to the Tin Man and the Scarecrow here, we cut back to the anger management place where Bigby is just pondering how he's going to answer Velma's question before he just turns his eyes to her and gives her like this sort of like small smirk where he's like, come on, you know what happens when I get angry. And then we get our title with the Wolf Among Us 2 with confirmation that it will be released next year in 2023. And god, I am so excited for the Wolf Among Us 2. Like, honestly, this looks 10 times better than Season 1. As someone who thought the Wolf Among Us 1, I didn't think the Wolf Among Us 1 was a bad game, but I do think it was a little bit overrated. I am excited to see what Telltale does with the Wolf Among Us 2 now and how they improve over Season 1. And that's going to cover everything you need to know about the Wolf Among Us 2 with this new announcement, whether it be everything from the live stream with the new place godmothers, we got new characters like Detective Fay Leong, Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and everything else from the trailer that gives us more insights to what exactly the story of the Wolf Among Us 2 is going to be. I hope you all enjoyed this video so much, and I can't wait to talk more about the Wolf Among Us 2. I'll actually be doing a Let's Play of the Wolf Among Us 1 in the coming few months to get ready for the Wolf Among Us 2, where, of course, I already know everything that happens, but I'm super excited to just play through it again for all you and see how it looks and compare it, speculate more about what's going to happen with the Wolf Among Us 2. I'll also, considering now that I'm done with my Transformers Cyberburst reviews, I also want to know if you guys are interested in me doing actual reviews of the Fables comics and actually the Fables Wolf Among Us comic that came out, because actually the Fables comics, which originally ended like 7 years ago or almost 7 years ago with Fables issue 150, Bill Willingham, the creator of Fables, is actually bringing back the Fables comics, where they say, Jeff Keighley stated this in his live stream, but in May of this year, we'll be actually getting the Fables issue 151, which will be the first new issue of Fables in almost 10 years, with the last one having come out in 2015, and it will continue the story canonically of the Fables comics after we had 2 spin-offs with the Wolf Among Us Fables and Fables Ever After. I'm super excited to jump back into the comics with Fables issue 151, and especially play through the Wolf Among Us again, maybe go over. So if you, maybe go over the Wolf Among Us comics. So if you want to see me review the Fables comics or the Fables Wolf Among Us comics, be sure to comment down that below, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe while you at it, because I'm just so excited for the Wolf Among Us 2 that it's finally coming in 2023 for the Xbox One, Xbox Series X, PS4, PS5, and PC exclusively through the Epic Games Store. If you're super excited for the Wolf Among Us 2 as much as I am, be sure to let me know down below, and I will see you guys later.